Hi, Katie. Welcome to Viome. We're very glad that you're on this journey with us to explore your gut microbiome. As you know, the collection of the microscopic organisms in your gut play a critical role in your overall wellness. With Viome's exclusive technology, we can now see what's happening inside your gut with a detail that has never been available before. So now that you've done your initial Viome test, let's review what your first round of results and recommendations look like on the Vi app. Remember that Coach Vi will be there to guide you along. She will walk you through your questionnaires and let you know when your results are ready, and she'll also walk you through your recommendations. Over time, she'll get smarter, and you'll be able to ask her questions. So from the chat screen, you can then jump into either your results or your recommendations. Let's start off by looking at your results. The first thing that you're going to see is your wellness index. Now, this index takes into account the results of all of your testing, all of the answers to your questionnaires, and the testing includes both MI and GI testing. So it's a great indication of your current state of overall wellness. You can see that you're in the high average range, so you're obviously doing a good job already. But by taking advantage of the insight from Viome's testing, the goal is to get your gauge into the green area and ultimately all the way over to the right over time. So the best way to improve your score is to follow the recommendations that have been created specifically for you and to monitor how you are doing at your next round of tests. We can look closer at what makes up your overall score by swiping to the right. This is your gut score, and it takes into account the health of your microbiome. That includes diversity, inflammatory markers, the organisms that are present, whether they're good or bad, and their functions. And overall, it's looking okay, but there is some room for improvement. As we'll see shortly, focusing and improving the overall balance in your gut should improve your other scores as well. So that brings us to your metabolic score. It's very good. It shows that your body is able to handle the nutritional challenge quite well and that you're efficient at energy metabolism, that you're meeting your nutritional requirements, and you're not being exposed to harmful substances in your environment. You still have a little bit of room for improvement in that your microbiome and cells are very quick at metabolizing foods, especially carbohydrates. And that may lead to episodes of very low blood sugar that can make you feel tired or can even wake you up from sleep at night. Your current diet of clean organic foods that I know you eat, including lots of vegetables and some protein, is obviously benefiting you. But we can maximize that even further when we look at your recommendations, which will include macronutrient ratios and specific foods to help balance your energy metabolism. Now, your score also takes into account overall body structure, and symptoms are also included in this score, and whether your current lifestyle choices are appropriate for you and especially for your microbiome. So once again, when your microbiome is in balance, this score will go up over time. Now, let's delve into your gut intelligence results. This is where Viome's state-of-the-art technology really shines. Viome sequences all of the RNA from your microbiome samples. So our testing has a high resolution that allows us to determine what organisms are present right down to the strain level. We can also see all bacteria, archaea, eukaryotes, and viruses. Now, before now, all other technologies that have been available can see bacteria only, and only down to the genus level. So RNA sequencing allows us to see how active these organisms are and exactly what functions that they're performing in addition to who they are. So for example, we can tell whether your microbes are metabolizing the specific proteins or carbohydrates that you're eating, or if they're making specific metabolites and nutrients that can be either beneficial or harmful for you. So if you click on the Learn More section of this My Gut page, it will tell you how to interpret some of these results. So each card has the name of the organism and the relative activity of that organism in your microbiome, and it's compared to all of the other organisms of that type. So for example, in this particular example, you can see that 21.55% of the metabolic activity of the bacteria in the microbiome is coming from the ethanolygenins group of bacteria. You can see what the average activity of this organism is in two other populations of people. So the everyone population includes all the people who have had Viome testing done, whether they're healthy or not. And the healthy population includes only those people who have met a very rigorous criteria for being considered healthy. They must be normal weight, not have any illnesses or symptoms, not be on any medications, and not have had any antibiotics in the past year, since even a single course of antibiotics will affect your microbiome for at least a year after taking them. Remember that everyone's microbiome is unique, and that whether an organism is beneficial or harmful will be dependent on all the other organisms that are present. The interpretation of your results takes into account this overall pattern of microbes and not just the activity of each microbe by itself. To finish up, you can see the icons that indicate whether that particular organism is considered a good guy, the little green star, whether it's considered a probiotic, the blue or purple box, and whether it's a rare bacteria. You can see the red circle. Rare means that it's active in you, but it's not active in most other people. So now let's look at what organisms are present in you and in your gut, Katie. You can see these under this same tab, the My Gut tab. The first thing you will see here is bacteria. Now, bacteria make up the largest component of the gut microbiome. There can be hundreds of different species of bacteria that live in each person's GI tract. Typically, a few hundred different species are present in each individual, but not all of them are active. In your case, you have 28 different species that are currently active and are actually doing something in your gut. A lot of the other ones are just sitting there, not performing any functions and not doing anything. So at the top, you'll see the bacteria at the strain level, and as you scroll down, you can see bacteria at the species level, at the genus. So this is still a strain level. We can see them at the species level here. You can see them at the genus level, which is what most other companies will look at, this quite high level, and then also at the phylum level. Remember, like I said before, most of the other microbiome testing that's available can only see down to the genus level, and it will completely miss the species and especially the strain levels. Not looking at the strain level is like describing your poodle as a canine. It's true that it is in the canine genus, but this genus also includes wolves, jackals, and hyenas. Obviously, although all are canines, they're very different from each other and have very different behaviors. Just like different species and strains of the same genus of bacteria can have very different effects. Let's start by looking at the overall composition of your microbiome. 54.17% of the activity of the bacteria are coming from the group called proteobacteria. This is a high amount of activity, as you can see when you compare it to the rest of the population, where it makes up on average 6% of their bacterial activity. Now, proteobacteria are gram-negative bacteria. That means they have an outer membrane that's made up of lipopolysaccharides, otherwise known as LPS. LPS is a very potent immune stimulator, and high amounts of bacteria that have this can lead to an overall activation of the immune system, otherwise known as inflammation. Now, since 70 to 80% of your immune system lives in the lining of your gut, it can easily be overactivated. And this level of inflammation can affect the rest of your body. When we see these potentially inflammatory bacteria this high, it's clear that the microbes are imbalanced. And this condition of imbalance in our microbiome is often called dysbiosis. Healthy microbes are consistently dominated by the Firmicutes and the Bacteroides phyla, which are much lower in U than the proteobacteria, as you can see. The other thing that's notable is that you are completely missing the Verrucomicrobia phylum. Now, this contains a beneficial organism called Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia has been shown in studies to be associated with reduced obesity, diabetes, and reduced diabetes and reduced inflammation. Now, moving up to the genus level, the highest activity is coming from this group of bacteria called Prevotella. And these are organized from highest to lowest activity at each level. So this Prevotella is making 37.01% of your overall activity at this level. Prevotella is usually associated with a plant food diet that's often higher in starches. It's also been associated with certain autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis. Now remember, there are many different strains and species that make up Prevotella, so it's not necessarily causative when you look at this high level. The activity of D-sulfovibrio is also quite high, as you can see, and that can be attributed, if we look at the strain level, to this particular strain called D-sulfovibrio disulfuricans, subspecies disulfuricans, and strain ATCC2774. The strains, as you can see, get very specific and detailed. Now, this particular strain accounts for 12.28% of the activity of all of your strains in your microbiome. This is one of those proteobacteria that I mentioned, and it's a sulfur-reducing bacteria, and that means it can produce hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide can often be very irritating to your gut lining. This particular bacteria is also associated with slow gastrointestinal motility, which can lead to constipation. Remember that a healthy gut needs to have good motility in order to continually move waste products out. We need to move the bacteria down to the colon and not allow them to set up shop higher in the small intestine as well, and that's another reason you need good motility. So if they set up shop higher up in the intestine, it can often lead to symptoms like pain and bloating. Now, by clicking on the name of these subspecies or all of the bacteria on this one, it will give you a little blurb and tell you a little bit about each of the particular strains and species, just in case you're curious. Don't worry about having to interpret all of these yourself. That's what we do, and all of that interpretation is taken into account in your recommendations. Now, if we go back and look at one other at the genus level, it's called Acetaminnococcus. And it's a particular group of bacteria that are protein fermenters. That means they can use amino acids as their sole source of fuel. And these particular ones like to use glutamate. Glutamate is a common additive in foods, such as in the form of monosodium glutamate or MSG that you might be familiar with. I know that you don't have a lot of MSG in your diet, and the level of these bacteria are at the genus level are only 1.62%, and that when you look at the strain and species level, they're extremely low, so they're not even showing up on your list, and that's a good thing. You do, however, have other protein fermenters. You have one called Tannarella forsythia 92A2. This particular strain also ferments protein. Now, too much protein fermentation in the gut can lead to certain byproducts such as ammonia, phenols, and hydrogen sulfide, which can be toxic. When we see high amounts of bacteria that ferment protein, it tells us that there's a lot of protein making it down into the colon and feeding those bacteria. This can lead to putrefactive fermentation and higher amounts of these toxic byproducts that we just mentioned. Now, normally dietary protein should be, and most of it is broken down and absorbed in the upper part of the intestine. But consuming large amounts of protein, or if you have poor digestion or are not producing enough digestive enzymes, it can allow more of it to get to the colon, where these bacteria can then ferment them. And these toxic byproducts can cause DNA damage in the gut lining. Now, the good news is that when there are enough fermentable carbohydrates in your diet and there's bacteria to eat these fermentable carbohydrates, specifically coming from vegetables that you eat, then there's a lot less DNA damage, so they can compensate for these protein fermenters. Now remember, these relationships are all taken into account when you receive your Viome recommendations. So let's look at this Tannerella forsythia 9-2A2 a little closer. This particular bacteria, along with Prevotella melanogenica, which is, we can see right here, this Prevotella melanogenica ATCC 25848, and another one called Porphyromonas gingivalis seen in your species section. These bacteria are associated with periodontal disease when they're found in the mouth. Now, these bacteria like to get together and form their own community, and when they're in a community, they can form biofilms and feed each other within these biofilms. They have been shown to promote non-specific systemic inflammatory responses and have also been associated with atherosclerotic plaques when they get into the bloodstream. So keeping a robust oral and gastrointestinal lining makes sense to limit what or who can easily cross the membrane and get into the bloodstream. As the saying goes, good fences make good neighbors. The bacteria should stay inside the GI tract, and the immune system should stay on the other side of the GI tract. Then they can politely talk to each other. But when the fences are broken down and the bacteria or other immune triggers like food particles cross that fence, the immune system gets upset and it fights back strongly, and it can sit and simmer for a long time, meaning it can cause a low-grade inflammation or very robust inflammation. So overall, Katie, you have a lot of bacteria that are associated with this inflammation and a compromised integrity of your gut lining. In other words, a breakdown of that fence. But don't be discouraged. We also need to look and see whether you have enough of the good guys to balance your microbiome. Some of the good guys are those that produce butyrate. Now, butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that has many beneficial effects. It acts to keep the lining of your gut healthy, it's anti-inflammatory, and it can also get absorbed into your bloodstream and even change your own genetic expression. These bacteria are often in the Clostridial and Rosebaria groups. Overall, your level of activity of Rosebaria hominis, we can see this particular strain here, the Rosebaria hominis strain A2183, it eats resistant starches, specifically the fructooligosaccharides, and we often find these starches in foods like bananas, onions, garlic, asparagus, jicamas, and leeks. And people with IBS and dysbiosis often have no Rosebaria activity at all. So it's nice to see that you have some, even though it's a little lower than we'd like to see it at 0.99%. And as I already mentioned, we don't see any Akkermansia activity, which is one of those good bacteria that are associated with leanness. But you have some good things to note. The Eubacterium rectali ATCC 33656 strain is relatively active in you. You can see that it's 5.09%, which is higher even than the healthy population. And this particular strain is associated with a better insulin response. Now, the Prevotella group that we mentioned earlier that was associated with periodontal disease, it includes a lot of the Bacteroides. And you can see that you have 1 Bacteroides, 2, 3, as we go down, 4, 5, 6 different strains of Bacteroides, which are also associated with a good insulin sensitivity. And altogether, these might be contributing to your really quick glucose response. Now, while we're on the Bacteroides, we can see that you have 2 different strains of a particular Bacteroides species. So this is where the strains start to get really important. You have one Bacteroides fragilis NCTC strain, and you have a different strain of the same species of Bacteroides fragilis called YCH46. This is a really great example of the ability and the importance to distinguish between different strains. Just like a poodle, to get back to our example of the canines, just like a poodle is very different from a pit bull by nature, certain strains of this Bacteroides fragilis produce a toxin that can contribute to inflammation, diarrhea, and possibly colon cancer, while a different strain, notably this particular one that you have, this NCTC strain, is considered anti-inflammatory. So it's nice to see that you have that one. Let's look at another bacteria strain. This is an interesting one. It's called Gordonobacter pamelae, and we'll skip the numbers for now, but this particular one likes to metabolize something called ellagic acid. This is a nutrient that's found in pomegranates, and it metabolizes it into urolithin A. Urolithin A is a metabolite that has anti-inflammatory, cardioprotective, and anti-cancer properties. So you're one of those people that will benefit from pomegranate intake, while people without this bacteria will likely not get the benefit when they consume pomegranate. Now, a lot of bacteria in our microbiome like to use phytonutrients, and this is one of the reasons why taking phytonutrients in our diet is so beneficial, in that it actually helps feed some of the beneficial bacteria in our gut. So this particular bacteria, Ruminococcus albus 7, is one that loves to break down cellulose from plants, and that's a good thing, and it's increased with resveratrol intake. So when we eat resveratrol, this particular bacteria tends to grow. So remember that your recommendations will include foods that will take advantage of and promote these good bacteria so that you'll get maximum benefit from them. Now, another organism that's not very active in your microbiome is archaea. We know that the Amerindian and even European populations have more archaea in their gut than North Americans do. So the North American lifestyle seems to be limiting these organisms. Methanobrevibacter smithii is one of the most common archaea, and it's been found to have very high activity in athletes. And unfortunately, this is one that we don't see in you, but we do look for it in people. One more thing to point out while we're looking at this strain level is a particular bacteria called Clostridium lentocellum DSM. This particular organism is high in you, but it's not found in very many other people. It was originally isolated from a river mud bank that was downstream of a paper mill, and we know it ferments cellulose from plants, but not much of it is known about its activity in the human gut. This points out part of the beauty of Viome's service. As we learn about these unique strains of organisms, and we will pull that information into your results and recommendations. So you'll be getting valuable insight throughout the year based on our continuous research. We continuously scour the literature and do our own research, and we'll always be incorporating these new findings into your recommendations. Now we can go and look over at eukaryotic organisms. As opposed to bacteria and archaea, these are organisms that have a nucleus and they have organelles like mitochondria. Humans are actually eukaryotes, and so are microorganisms like yeast and parasites. Katie, you only have one eukaryotic organism that is active in your gut microbiome. You see 100% activity because it's the only eukaryotic organism that you have, so it will make up 100% of activity of eukaryotes. It's called Saccharomyces, and this particular one, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, is seen in about 50% of the people that we tested. But when we look at the level that you have much more than most other people. You're actually at the 100th percentile according to everyone else that we've tested. Now, this is also known as baker's or brewer's yeast, and it can be found in the probiotic called Saccharomyces boulardii. So that may be where it's coming from in you if you've ever taken that particular probiotic. You also only have one virus that's active in your gut, and it's the most common one we see, called pepper mild mottle virus. Just as it sounds, this is a virus that causes mottling disease in peppers. Now, the fact that viruses that cause disease in plants are found replicating in the human microbiome is a really new finding. No one has ever looked at this before, so not much is known about the effect of these plant viruses on the humans. But we do know that some of these viruses, like this pepper mild mottle virus, can cause an immune reaction in humans, and it can cause symptoms like itching, fever, and stomach pain. So following the activity of these viruses over time will be very important to see how supporting your microbiome with our personalized recommendations will affect them. And of course, as we mentioned, with Viome's continuous research, we will continue to make valuable insights into these organisms and include them in your recommendations. Moving on, we can look at diversity, which is a very important measurement. The graph here shows the richness, which is the total number of species of bacteria that are present in your microbiome, and it shows the diversity, which is the amount of each of these species. So you can think of it like this. Think of it as an example, you can have 100 different kinds of bacteria that are active in your gut. That would be the richness. Now, of those 100, you could have 90 of them of one particular kind and one of each of the other kinds. That would be low diversity. Or you could have 90 of all of them. That would be high diversity. Now, high diversity and richness is associated with a healthy microbiome and thus your overall wellness. So you want to aim for as high diversity as possible. In your case, your richness is on the low end, but you have a fairly even distribution of the bacteria, so you have a fairly good diversity. You can also see if you have some of the beneficial bacteria under the Good Guys tab. Now, in your case, you just have one showed up that we mentioned before, the Rosebaria hominis. We can also look to see if you have any probiotic organisms in your gut. These are ones that are found in commercially available probiotic supplements. So you can check to see if what you're taking is actually active in your gut. And in your case, you can see that we couldn't identify any active probiotic organisms currently. The myRNA shows the amount of human RNA, so that's your own RNA from your own cells that are showing up in your microbiome sample. This usually comes from the cells that are lining your gut. Now, if there's inflammation or an infection, then more cells will be shed and there'll be more human RNA showing up. You have a slightly higher than average amount of human RNA, which is consistent with that high amount of the gram-negative organisms that we saw before. The rare bacteria show the organisms that are active in your microbiome but have low or no activity in the majority of the population. Everybody will have some rare bacteria, since we all have microbiomes that are as unique as our fingerprints. And in fact, there's no one species that's been found in every single person tested. Now, although it's not in the app yet, the function of your microbiome has also been analyzed. Since we sequence the RNA and not the DNA, we can see all of the genes that are expressed by your microbes and what functions they're performing. Now, when we looked at your functional analysis at a high level, your tryptophan metabolism and your energy cycles are low compared to other people's microbiomes. In our initial analysis, things like interval training seem to be associated with higher energy cycle expression. And tryptophan metabolites include indole propionic acid, or IPA. Now, IPA protects brain cells and is an antioxidant. It's actually being studied for use in Alzheimer's disease. Bacteria like Clostridium sporogenes can eat tryptophan from the food we intake, food like turkey, and it can metabolize it into IPA, which then gets absorbed into our bloodstream and can then protect our brain. And things like serotonin is also a tryptophan metabolite. So remember that your recommendations will include suggested probiotics, prebiotics, and foods that will encourage some of these beneficial organisms and beneficial functions. So we just went over an enormous amount of information, and there's much more that we did not go over. But rest assured that we don't expect you to understand and interpret all of this data. It's there in the app for those of you that are curious and want to dig a little deeper and follow how the organisms change over time. Our AI, called Vi, and our translational science team do the interpretation for you, and your recommendations take all of this data into account. By following your personal diet and nutrient recommendations, you should notice the best results. Now let's explore what these recommendations look like. These recommendations are determined specifically for you. And like I said, they're based on the results of all of your GI testing, your MI testing, as well as the answers to your questionnaires. Now at Viome, we take seriously the fact that one man's food is another man's poison. There is no one diet that's right for everyone. And based clearly, as you saw, based on your microbiome and on your personal genetics, every person requires a unique ratio of macronutrients and specific foods. And this ratio and the specific foods that are optimal for you will also change over time, depending on how your environment affects your microbiome and your epigenetics. So the goal is to optimize your energy production, optimize your utilization of nutrients, and of course the composition and function of your microbiome. So by following these recommendations, we want to move your wellness index as far into the green as possible and ultimately have you look and feel the best that you possibly can. Now, as you look at your recommendations, you will notice 4 categories of food. The indulged foods are ones that we want you to eat a lot of. They're ones that are chosen just for you to balance your body and microbiome to maximize your wellness and really promote those beneficial organisms that we were talking about and suppress the ones that we don't want growing too much. Now, we want to aim for you to eat at least some of these foods every day. You want to indulge on them, but still remember to stop when you're 80% full. The enjoy food category are ones that are very good for you, for your body, your microbiome, and in addition to the indulge foods, they should form the foundation of your diet. Again, aim to eat foods on this list every day. The minimize foods are ones that you can eat once in a while. They're okay for you, but they'll not really be supporting your body to reach optimal functioning. You can eat them once in a while, but you should limit the amount you eat to a few times a week. The avoid foods are ones that are harmful to you and your microbiome. You want to do your best to completely avoid these foods and then replace them with your indulge and enjoy foods. On the overview, you will see a summary of your recommendations. Now, in your case, Katie, your first round of recommendations is focused on a more intense rebalancing of your microbiome and a reestablishing the integrity of your gut barrier. Therefore, you will see very specific foods as well as supplement recommendations aimed to do this. Following these recommendations closely for 3 to 4 weeks will give you the best results. You will notice that seemingly healthy foods have been intentionally minimized for you because they will contribute to this imbalance. Once again, you can see the supplements here, and we give you very specific recommendations for those as well. Now, once balance is achieved, some of these healthy foods are going to be okay to eat again. So you're going to receive an updated list of foods and supplements in about a month. It's important to follow the initial recommendations closely before you go on to the next step. In the near future, Vi will be able to walk you through each step of these recommendations and check in with you on how you're doing. So keep an eye out as your recommendations come in. They'll be continually updated over time. So the next thing you'll see is the recommended macronutrient ratios that will optimally support your metabolism to make it the most efficient. Your initial recommendations, as you can see, are for a balanced intake of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. But this is going to change with your next set of recommendations as your microbiome becomes more balanced. Remember, it's still important to listen to your body and monitor how you feel. You want to pay attention to your hunger level, your energy, and your mood 1 to 3 hours after eating. If you're eating the appropriate foods according to your recommendations, you should feel great on all levels. If you don't, you need to adjust your ratios slightly. Also remember that fat is more calorie dense than protein or carbohydrates. So when you look at the volumes of food on your plate, it will look like this, with the majority of volume coming from non-starchy vegetables. Now, if you know that you're allergic to certain foods, make sure that you avoid those. Those will obviously take precedent over all of the other recommendations. Then we can go on and there's some tips here on when and some tips on cooking. And then we can go on to look at the breakdown of all the foods. You will see them under carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And you can see that carbohydrates consist of grains, vegetables, fruits, and beverages under carbohydrates as well. So you can scroll through and you can see things under the indulge, enjoy, and minimize. Now for you, Katie, you won't notice any foods under the indulge category in this round of recommendations, but those will show up for you under the next round. So we can go through and explore all the foods in this manner. You can see certain ones you'll want to minimize and others you'll want to avoid. We can go to the beverages, salt, and obviously sweeteners you want to limit. You can look under certain fats, which include nuts and seeds, and then oils, and then under proteins, which consist of meats and seafood. And then there's the list of foods to avoid. Now, these contain foods like sugar, candy, white bread that are harmful to everyone, as well as specific foods that you personally should avoid. Now, this list is going to be bigger for you right now while you're on the first phase of your recommendations, as you can see here. Remember, you'll get more on your next round, more foods that you can include in your diet. Food preparation, as you know very well, is obviously very important, and we give a few tips on how to prepare some of these foods. You can use your wellness index as a gauge to how you're doing over time as you follow your personalized recommendations. We're glad that you're on this journey with us to use the power of molecular biology and artificial intelligence to create truly personalized wellness.